Hello, Sydney. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name. Right. I think I can. Okay, I think we're waiting for a few more panelists, and I can see that people are joining the session. So welcome everybody to this first session of the Festival of Learning. We're really excited to have you here. We will give everyone a few minutes, make their way. We're not even at 11 o'clock, we're all early. Right, we'll just relax for a couple of minutes.
While people join, I'm gonna invite people to start sharing with one another in the chat. Welcome to our first session. If you feel so inclined, please do share your name, your location, and what's one question you're arriving to today's session with. So that is in the chat. Feel free to share that information with us as we wait for others to join the session. Thanks, everyone.
This is the bit in real life, isn't it, where we'd all be hovering around the coffee station, looking at the bag full of stuff that we'd just been given with all the flyers and the programme and that kind of thing.
Checking out the biscuits.
Seeing how many of those mini croissants we could eat. We had to sit down.
I'm really sorry if you've done it already, GB. I will be that person that intervenes on the croissants and biscuits and says, hiya, I'm the other Geraldine. I should change my name on here. Please do give us a follow on Twitter. We're hashtagging this as London Learn Fest. I'm furiously typing away. And also we're going to pop in the chat as well, the rest of the Festival of Learning programme for you guys to get involved with. I will now disappear and leave you with the far superior of the two Geraldines.
Oh, not at all, GT. Let's, I think we should give it another minute and then make a start. And we don't have Yanis and Otis, but I'm hoping they will join us any second now. So for those of you who don't already know us, we're London Funders. We are the membership network for funders and investors in London civil society. So independent funders, the public sector, corporate foundations, and our role is all about helping funders to be effective, bringing them together, to cooperate, to collaborate, and to contribute to people across London's communities in the most effective way. This is welcome to the Festival of Learning. This is the first session in a really exciting programme of 6 days of activities from today until the end of next Wednesday. And the Festival of Learning is all about bringing our members together to reflect on and share learning from the extraordinary year that we've just lived through. We really want to highlight the brilliant work that's gone on over the last year between funders in civil society, and we want to share learning about what worked and also about what didn't work. And we hope that that learning is then a springboard for action by funders to build a movement for progressive change that makes the capital a better place for everybody who lives here. So exciting stuff. This session is a webinar, so you can only see us, the speakers. It's due to run to 1 o'clock, but we may well finish slightly earlier than that. We will definitely finish 5 minutes before that because the next session will come on this link. So we need to be out of their way so that they can start. I am going to do a short introduction and then I'm going to hand over to Yanis and Sydney. So this is the Delivering Differently session. This is about the London community response. There are a number of sessions through the next 6 days about the London community response, so you will hear plenty about it. But the highlights are that 67 funders came together to get money out quickly, simply and equitably to community organisations working in London in order that they could respond to the needs of their communities as London went into lockdown. There were 5 waves of funding over the last year. The first one launched 4 days after lockdown, lockdown number 1, and the last one just finished making decisions at the end of March. And throughout that whole year, the London Community Response made nearly 3,500 grants and gave out £57.5 million. And the fastest grant in that time was made within 48 hours of the application being received. So a really, really big change for how funders usually operate. Wave 2 of the London Community Response was called Delivering Differently and asked community organisations what they needed to do in the context of being locked down to change the way that they were delivering and what they were delivering. And that theme of delivering differently continued through the various waves, subsequent waves of funding. And we've been so impressed by the flexibility and the inventiveness of organisations in London in doing things, in continuing to make sure that the people who need support are getting support, despite the fact that you can't open your centres and you can't even see people face to face. So, I mean, just amazing work. We appointed Reos Partners as one of our learning partners part of the way through last year. And one of the questions that we asked them to investigate was, how can the experiences of civil society groups during this period inform future ways of working for funders? So this workshop and a report that will be published after the festival are an answer to that question. So I'm going to hand over to Sydney and Yanis from Reos to take us through. Thank you. Thanks,
Geraldine, and thanks to everyone who's participating in I think it's the opening session now from what I gathered to the Learning Festival. And it's a privilege for us to be amongst you and amongst our 4 panelists who will share some really great stories about how they deliver differently. So as Geraldine said, we are from Reos Partners. My name is Yanis. I am a principal and head of our London office. And I have here with me Sydney Hayes from Bern, right? You're in Bern today. So Reos Partners is an international, small international social enterprise, and we help people move forward on their most important and intractable issues. So we work a lot on issues of health and climate, and so we're more process experts. We're not content experts as on a particular topic, but we we help people to think about things in a different way and move forward with issues. And our approach is systemic and involves multiple stakeholders. As Geraldine said, we're delighted to work with the London funders over the last, I guess it's now 8 months almost, or more. No, a lot more than that. No, less than that. 9 months now, where we developed a set of scenarios which we will be working with some of you that will be joining us for the session next week, and presenting those to the community. Today's session is about delivering differently, and a lot of work has gone into serving organizations in terms of how they delivered differently over the last year. So it's been an extraordinary year. There are a lot of things that we had to do differently, and we're learning from that. And a lot of innovation has come up from all of this. So we're going to be learning more about that today. I will invite my colleague Sydney now to maybe just briefly introduce yourself, Sydney, and take us through the Delivering It Differently report. This is just a pre-published sort of snapshot of it. It's not out there yet. It will come out, but it's not even hot off the shelf yet. It's still on the shelf. So
Thanks, Giannis. Thanks, Giannis, and good morning, everyone. We're really happy to be here today presenting the Delivering Differently, the beginnings of the Delivering Differently report, but more importantly, all of the work that the CSOs across London have done over the past year. And we'll be highlighting some of that tremendous work after I introduce the report and its typology. Just a note to flag that we have at Reos Partners worked with 2 other colleagues who have been alongside Giannis and I, integral in kind of harvesting and documenting these learnings in the system. And so this report was created and put together by them. Unfortunately, Sarah, the lead writer on that, isn't able to join us. So I will do my very best to present this with justice, and trusting that the panelists will, of course, steal the show shortly after me. So I have a short PowerPoint that I'm going to share with everyone. Okay. So as Geraldine said, one of the biggest questions that we've been looking into is how have people, organizations, teams been delivering differently in times of crisis. That's why we're all here today, and that's what we're going to be looking into and discussing. And the report that will be published sometime after this session in the early summertime, we're thinking, is all about how CSOs delivered differently. And the purpose of the presentation of these findings is hopefully to inspire the uptake of the useful ideas that we've highlighted others using and working in the sector. Of course, this learning has all come about in a time of tremendous crisis, but there are some really positive changes that have been made across the system that we find will be very valuable in sharing widely. We've come to these kinds of typologies, as we're calling them, and themes through a huge survey. There was 582 CSOs who provided these examples in response to the survey, which was conducted in September 2020 and synthesized at the end and the very beginning of 2021. We had an overwhelming amount of data, as you can imagine, to kind of sift through. So there are 4 overarching typologies that we're going to present today to all of you, and we have 4 wonderful panelists who have joined us to speak and share their stories about each for those 4 typologies. But then within those typologies, there are a couple of sub-themes that I'll be sharing in my presentation. And yeah, as I said, this was through the analysis of the responses from diverse CSOs that emerged on how they delivered their services differently in the midst of crisis. So The first typology that we've come to is using technology in new ways. Here we have two sub-themes. The second typology is communicating through new channels. The third typology, using physical space in new ways. We also have two sub-themes for this typology. The fourth, coordinating in new ways. And the way that I'll present this moving forward is sharing with you the typology and the sub-themes, what those really mean to us, what we've distilled those down to through the synthesis of the survey. And then I will share a couple of voices from the field, so quotes that we've taken from our data to help you get a better picture, a more colorful understanding of what that typology sounded or looked like this past year. And then we'll have, of course, a more in-depth experience with one of our panelists on each of these typologies and a chance for question and answer at the end. So the first typology we've come to know is using technology in new ways. And this had a first and a second sub-theme, the first of which was moving services online. So the lockdown and subsequent social distancing guidelines required many organizations across London to rapidly adapt and move their services online. In many cases, this resulted in CSOs reaching a larger number of beneficiaries and empowering them with easily accessible online resources and educational tools. So this is moving services online, and I'm now going to show you a voice from the field. I won't read it out loud. I'll let you read it on your own. Okay. And the second sub-theme here was technology-based services for deaf and disabled people. CSOs who specialized in serving these populations and communities developed innovative technology-based services to support their beneficiaries, enabling them to communicate with healthcare workers and keeping people informed by making information accessible throughout the pandemic. Another voice from the field representing this sub-theme. The second typology that we came across in our research was communicating through new channels. And what this really looked like was CSOs using new channels for communication, including television, podcasts, webcasts, and social media outlets. And a voice from the field speaking to this typology sounded like this. The third typology that we found was using physical space in new ways. And here we have, again, two sub-themes. The first of which is distributed service provisions. And this looked like the logistics of access to essential resources such as food being a key challenge at the beginning of the pandemic and through the subsequent lockdowns. So what CSOs came up with were innovative solutions through collaborating with other service providers and businesses as delivery partners. Besides the distribution of basic needs, CSOs recognize the challenges that come with families spending more time at home. To assist families in coping with the stress and challenges that come with an extended lockdown, CSOs distributed activity packs with all of the essential materials to their beneficiaries' homes. This was distributed service provisions, and here is a voice from the field representing this sub-theme. The second sub-theme here was using vacant property for alternative solutions. The pandemic resulted in property being vacated due to social distancing guidelines, and therefore service providers took this opportunity to set up things like food banks and homeless hubs in these vacant locations. A voice from the field related to this sub-theme sounds like this. Okay, and our fourth and final typology was called coordinating in new ways. And coordinating in new ways has as well two sub-themes, the first of which was called increased external and internal coordination. Some CSOs responded to the crisis by coordinating and collaborating with other organizations, local governments, businesses, and service providers to both increase their reach and their impact. A voice from the field speaking to this sub-theme sounded like this. The second sub-theme here was delivering through volunteers to overcome the challenges of downsizing the number of paid staff. Many CSOs recruited more volunteers or even moved to a volunteer-based model to meet the increased demand for their services in the pandemic times. And a voice from the field representing this delivering through volunteers sub-theme sounded like this. So that is it for my slide deck. I hope that gives you a very light sense of how CSOs were delivering differently in times of crisis over the past year. As we said, the full report, which includes many more voices from the field and a little bit more information about those typologies and sub-themes, will be released sometime early this summer. And of course, we have today with us 4 wonderful panelists who are going to be sharing more in depth about those typologies. So I will hand it over to Giannis and the panelists from here.
Thanks, Sydney. There's such a rich background here in terms of the 4 stories that we'll be hearing from. Just to quickly present the panelists, and then we'll move with the flow of the day. So we have 4 panelists. Our first panelist will be Otis Roberts, who's the CEO of the Jason Roberts Foundation, and he'll be talking about communicating through new channels. They did some very good work with their podcast series. Then we'll go to Patrick Tronzi. He's the chief exec of the Brixton Advice Center, and they switched the whole advice center online, and he'll talk more about that in a minute. We'll go over to Mike Wilson after that, who will be talking about coordinating new ways. Mike is the exec director of the Pembroke House, and they're doing hundreds of volunteers, new volunteers, to support food deliveries during the pandemic. And then we're going to end the panel presentations with Sam Dale, head of programs with the London Sports Trust. They transformed a car park by painting ball courts. More to hear about that in a few minutes. Now, the way we would moderate this is I'm inviting the audience to put in the chat box all the questions they have about the particular presentation that they're going through, and then we'll ask those questions, or as many as we can, depending on time at the end, to the panelists that the question is intended to. So as we're starting with Otis, I would also suggest or invite the audience to ask the questions, and also put the name for which panelist it is, if it's not for everyone. Yeah, that's it. I'm chomping at the bit to hear what Otis did with their podcast. So over to you, Otis, to take us through this. I believe there's a presentation as well that will be shared, but over to you, Otis. Thanks. You're on mute. Can't believe we keep saying that after almost 2 years.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on today, and welcome everyone. Just want to share just some of the foundation's story and what we've been doing since the last year in the pandemic, in a very unfortunate time that we've all had to live with. So if we just go to the screen there. So yeah, it was we kind of, it came upon us in March with the pandemic, and we all our lives kind of were slightly adjusted, to say the least. The foundation's been going for quite some time, 11, 12 years, and we're very much a delivery partner. So we deliver services through sport, education and pathways, and we have a lot of contact with our clientele and our base, whether it be young people, whether it be people of middle age, right across the board in terms of accessing our services and our delivery. So to that end, I mean, when we recently took over a facility which we were all excited about, and we're in the second year of that, and we were just kind of getting to grips with what that enables us to do and widens and broadens our reach. So from going from not being able to deliver anymore and having to close the centre, to thinking of new ways how we can work with our stakeholders and our partners and the like. So very quickly we had an event that we had to cancel, and I'm sure loads of foundations and organisations had to cancel events at this time, and that kind of hit us a little bit. And between the trustees and our staff, we had to think of a way of how we can still get that event across, and still reach the audience that we were trying to reach. So it was an event at Wembley, and it was an event around crime and anti-knife crime, and it was titled "The Prison to the Premier League," which is a true story of a colleague who had taken that journey, but really we were hitting the messaging around how that happened and what's going on in today's society. So we had to take that online, and it wasn't something that we were brilliant online. We didn't really, as I said, we're a delivery charity. We didn't really have much in terms of what we do online. So we we managed to respond quickly and still pull that off. Went down quite well. Everybody was at home, and we managed to get a decent audience and produce it into 5 or 6 different periods. So that went down well. So we also deliver quite a large project to SEN pupils and parents. And we then took that online and created a podcast called You Are Not Alone. It started with just some schools, people from the council, and parents who were sharing their experiences of what they were doing online with young people, and what they were able to do, in terms of the limited space that was available in terms of restrictions and going outside and everything like that. So we felt that was a really good podcast because that brought people together. We even had people coming in from France and the Caribbean, kind of just giving us a different perspective of a global view of how we can deal with children, specifically with SEN needs. So that was quite a good one for us to be able to pull off. The impact it made by us delivering differently was big on the organisation. We learned a lot. Our trustees learned a lot. We had to respond very quickly to a space that we weren't really used to. So we looked at different ways of how we can improve that. So what we did was we knew we had to change our fundraising strategy. We knew we had to look at different ways to respond. So we managed to pull together a grant to get some equipment that could go into our centre quite quickly. And that was on the response of just pulling in some funding pots that were available out there, which we felt that was really, really helpful at the time. Into that end, we managed to secure some equipment to be able to respond online, and that's what we did. We've done a series of podcasts around Brent, which was the borough culture at that time. We were the mayor's charity last year, so we kind of done everything around culture. We produced sort of a Remembering Brent story. We looked at all of the different cultures that were in Brent and started to bring those stories together and get people online. And then we created the Culture Media Centre, which we wanted to amplify people's voices in the community. So that was something that was quite special to us to be able to pull off. We then looked at what we could do in terms of learning. So we started to review football players' books that were either out for a year or just coming up. Started to review those and get the public involved in those discussions. And we had our young people coming on there and asking questions directly to these players, but with different messages around what was happening in their life, how everyone was dealing with the pandemic. And we were able to give certificates to our young people who participated, so they could have sort of some soft qualification as the fact that they were able to speak in front of a group on a large Zoom. So that was fantastic. We really looked at that, and when we kind of came out of the restrictions into coming back into play, we were able to open during the summer, and we realised that we had quite a lot of people coming back to our centre, obviously with restrictions and guidance in place, and all this PPE, but we had to put in place. So we managed to do that, which was great. But then we went into a really good summer. Had lots of delivery, but what we were able to do is, because we were online, also we had this space which had a green screen and everything like that. Some of the kids, we were able to take some of the equipment outside so they can practice outside broadcast and stuff like that. So what we also did was we worked with the University of Football and Business in Wembley Stadium, and they were to give us a couple of volunteers that would teach young people how to use the equipment. So the big learning for us was the fact that we were so hell-bent on delivering, and our delivery models around sport and golf and tennis and football and bringing that together through sport. But actually, just by, our foundation kind of changed in March when we were forced to really speak in a different way and try to go paperless and deliver online in a different way, which I found that we reached a far wide range of people. I felt that it stretched the organisation, which is good, because we want to be stretched and we want to grow. And I felt that we were in a good space to move it forward. By delivering differently, I think a lot more people engaged with us and knew what we did. And what we were able to do in that period was to actually press the reset button. We managed to do a new website, which kind of changed our offer and our being. We looked at elderly sessions online. We've done boxing and fitness sessions online. We're doing nostalgia around elderly online. So I think coming out of the lockdown and coming into this period where we are now, we're in a really good position to really amplify some of the work and what we've been able to do. It's been an unfortunate situation for everybody with the pandemic, but it has, as an organisation, made us really go back to the drawing board and kind of pull out the bits that are important to one, of our participants and the community, and two, the staff. We're able to get them on training courses online and stuff like that. So yeah, we feel that going forward, that we're ready for any eventuality. If we were to go into a restrictive lockdown again in the future, we feel that we are in a position to be adaptable. And this area and this time that's just passing by us now has really tested us as an organisation, and we're kind of grateful in that respect that we were able to put some stuff in place. We're still growing and learning, and we're really grateful to some of the funders and the funding that was out there that responded to some of the need that the community so deservedly need. Thank you.
Thank you, Otis, for this presentation. It's really great to see how you quickly adapted and you were able to deliver in all these different ways. And podcast was certainly part of it, but I can see it's not the only thing. So congratulations. I will invite the audience to use the chat box to ask any questions that they have, in particular for the work that the Jason Roberts Foundation is doing and what Otis just presented to us. And we will take those questions at the end. So thank you, Otis. The next one, the next panelist that we have here is Patrick Tonzi. Patrick, over to you. Take us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. I wish I'd have gone first now, because I think Otis is a tough act to follow, to tell you the honest truth. But there you go. That sounded fantastic. Just a bit about us. I work at Brixton Advice Centre, which is obviously in Brixton, in Lambeth, London. We are a specialist legal advice charity, so we provide free legal advice, usually around things like welfare benefits, debts, housing, things like that. We have quite a lot of partnerships. We work with kind of local food banks, in schools, with a local women's refuge, where we put advisors on site. So kind of advisors are kind of right at the different phases of need, really, you know, where people kind of tend to be in the most difficulties and stuff. We also run we did run an evening pro bono legal advice clinic, which is basically just solicitors and local solicitors and barristers just offering their time for free, advising you know, clients who would come through the door in our drop-in on, you know, a whole range of legal problems, from employment, family, you know, whatever, neighbourhood disputes, whatever is bothering people. Much like Otis, what happened to us obviously with the lockdown was we had to close the front door. And the thing about Brixton Advice Centre is we're a community-based centre, and probably about 80% of our delivery was based on people walking in that front door and sitting in reception and saying, I've got a legal problem, I need some help, and what have you. Closing the front door was a massive change for us, you know, along with all the other adjustments to the pandemic at the time, such as, you know, what we're going to do, what does it mean? It was a real worry to us because obviously all the people that were coming in to see us were no longer coming in to see us, and we knew they were still out there and still no doubt experiencing some kind of problems. So we had to think about how we would carry on, and we began simply really by just setting up 2 telephone advice lines, getting those publicised, you know, across Lambeth, you know, with the help of the council and working with the council, other organisations such as Centre 70, who's kind of like a partner organisation of ours. And we also started this thing about basically like boosting what we were delivering through our website. So our website has always been, rather than kind of a PR engine, it's always been something that we hoped practical. The homepage is an advice finder. So if, when you approach the website, the first thing you look at is kind of you know, there's different subject categories of what you might be having issues with, and where you can get advice on those. So we started also on the website setting up accepting queries through kind of web forms on the website, which picked up really quickly. And one area of work that I think is probably the most interesting thing we did, certainly in terms of delivering differently, was creating the online legal clinic. I've already mentioned that we'd done the Thursday evening sessions with you know, a few local solicitors coming in, advising the clients that came in. Obviously, with the lockdown, we couldn't do that anymore, and we thought it would be an absolute shame if all those solicitors and barristers who were no longer, you know, kind of in many cases doing much work themselves anyway in the lockdown, it would be a real shame if we couldn't find some way to kind of like leverage that and kind of carry on providing some services. So we created this idea of the online legal clinic, which is, it basically relies on some stuff we'd already been using. We're part of Google's non-profit program, so we have access to things like Google Workspace, which is like a set of business enterprise tools and things, but we have it for free because we're a charity, which is great. So we started trying to use that, and we use kind of a function what's called Google Groups, which basically allows a collaborative inbox. So we set lots of forms up on the websites where people with legal problems can access the form on the website, complete the form. This is one of the main intake. The form then goes through to the clinic. The clinic itself is a big collaborative inbox with, at the moment, I think when we started it was 6, but now it's about 15 solicitors and barristers who all have access to the clinic and kind of can pick up and deal with inquiries in there. We also have we also managed to obtain some funding through London Funders, which we were massively grateful for, which allowed us to employ a coordinator, a part-time solicitor coordinator of the clinic, and Harriet manages all that process. So she kind of keeps an eye on quality of advice, makes sure the lawyers are all engaged, all cooperating, all working together, make sure things are getting done. She can assign inquiries, things like that. So it was a very interesting model, and it just took off in a really big way, and in a much bigger way than we anticipated, to be perfectly frank. We started out in the pandemic by just saying, if you want advice, legal advice, you know, come and get it, which was probably a bit crazy really now in retrospect, because we were absolutely swamped in no time. We then, partly through conditions of funding and partly through kind of managing the capacity, limited the advice that we were able to give to people who are just resident in Lambeth, and also to people who met a very simple means test, you know, some people who were unable to afford legal advice elsewhere, that kind of thing. So that it was interesting. It did really well. I think we probably where we are now, we've probably dealt with about 400 or 500 kind of specialist legal advice problems, ranging from people being evicted to family disputes and separation, lots of employment disputes. I mean, employment and housing disputes were just off the scale through the pandemic, and particularly as the lockdown started easing. What did we learn? Well, I think the key things for me is we learned that Brixton Advice Centre is more than just a physical presence. Even though we were a centre with a door open to the street and where people could walk in and what have you, we were a lot more than that. We were, we were able to deliver a much broader range of services. We suddenly realized that actually by being kind of more proactive about changing things, we could actually reach a far wider range of people, which was great to us. We learned that there was a massive management cost in remote services and putting things online. I know there's a lot of talk about, people saying, technology is great and technology is, wonderful, but technology itself isn't really the answer. Technology, I think, creates possibilities, but I think really it's how we use it to start asking the real questions. And the real difficulty we had in managing all the online services, the online legal clinic, plus, our normal advice services, was just knitting everything together and keeping the people together. I must have spent I did spend a lot of my time on one-on-ones with staff and things like this, and trying to keep them supported, keep them motivated. Coming from an environment where everybody's working in a big office together to going to this kind of remote working was a really, really big change. The clinic did really well. I was pleased that we won a national award for the LawWorks Pro Bono Awards at the end of last year for best contribution by a pro bono clinic, which was fantastic. But all the credit for that really goes to the volunteers, solicitors and barristers who contribute. Another thing we learned as well, and particularly about the clinic model, was that, and using volunteers, and it links to the management cost thing, is that the coordination of that is absolutely vital. You can't just rely on people coming in, doing some stuff for free or doing a bit of volunteering and then kind of drifting off. You really need to invest in those people and kind of developing those relationships with them, etc. So winning the award was actually a nice one, because we were able to say to the clinic volunteers, you did this, it's your work that did this. So that was great. Going forwards, we've kind of carried on with that. We opened during that gap last year when there was a bit of an ease, in restrictions, to see what it was like. And probably because people were still worried about COVID, we hardly got anybody coming in through the door. And we still carried on really just doing everything online, doing, through video conferencing, telephone calls, etc., etc. We're just opening again now as it happens. But going forwards, we've definitely decided to really change the whole way that we approach our delivery now. And we'll be adopting a hybrid model. So we'll still be doing a reception area, but we're changing how that works now and integrating that into the web forms thing, where people can come in, will be assisted to, referred internally to different teams, etc., etc. And we just see that as a really useful way of managing the work, basically. One final word on probably what makes it all possible, as well as the funding, which we're very grateful for, is volunteers. During the pandemic, so many people wanted to help, and I think that was fantastic, and it was a testament to, everybody wanted to kind of be part of a solution and give something back. So using volunteers has been fantastic. It's not easy though, but it's brilliant, and that's been another kind of facet of our work. This may come up later, but I'll just throw this in now, really, which is just in terms of the funders and how it relates to me thinking about the organisation going ahead, is that it's okay setting up individual projects and things like that, but we're kind of at a stage now where the whole of the centre's thinking about how we're going to cope with post-lockdown, and in terms of legal advice, we know that it's already going through the roof. So it was never a now problem, it was always a when problem, and that when's kind of starting to happen right now. So we're very keen kind of in conversations with funders to be trying to highlight to them that if we can't fund the broad services and infrastructure costs, that they see that what they are funding is part of a much bigger whole and part of a plan, a kind of a bit more of a cohesive plan. And I probably just rambled on there, and I'm not even sure how many minutes I rambled on for, so you'll have to forgive me. But if anybody does have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them later.
Thank you, Patrick. What I'm noticing already is, whilst we had this typology of innovation or delivering impact differently, I can see already both the organizations that shared some of the learnings, they've managed to do things differently in all of these, almost all of these typologies, and that's fine, and that's great. Thanks, Patrick. I'll still invite people to share any questions they have in the chat box for Patrick in this instance, and then we can take those at the end. With that, we will move to Sam, who's the head of programs for the London Sports Trust, and he's going to, we're going to go to Mike Wilson. That's the order. I scared you there, Sam. You're like, what is he doing? Sorry, I'm going to Mike Wilson, Executive Director of Pembroke House, and he's going to share also some volunteer interesting innovation and other things as well. So over to you, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Two really fascinating talks. I'm really looking forward to digging into the Q&A at the end. But yeah, I've been asked to speak on partnerships and coordinating in a new way. So I'll just hope that you can see my screen. I'm going to whip through a little bit of sort of the lessons of what we've learned in COVID about partnerships and coordinating in a new way. I think, Yanis, as you say, I think this is going to touch as well on some of these other areas of the typology and pick up on themes that I think, have been mentioned already. But before I sort of whip into COVID, I think it's important just to see this in the context of the work we were doing beforehand, because I think a lot of that is actually on how we've changed and what we've brought with us and what we haven't, I think is really interesting in this. So we're Pembroke House, we're a community organisation. We're actually part of the settlement movement, so we're long-standing. We've been sort of in place since 1885. So similar to Toynbee Hall, which I know where London Funders are based, part of the same movement. We're based in Woolworth, so our sort of patch or our neighbourhood is Woolworth, which is just south of Elephant and Castle. In South London, and that sort of neighbourhood framework is really the frame that we use for all of our work, and that patch is about 45,000 usual residents who inhabit Woolworth, 3 wards in Southwark. And Woolworth is actually a neighbourhood of very sort of long-standing inequality. So this was the sort of Charles Booth map of poverty that was drawn when we were first founded, actually, so back at the end of the 19th century. And it's an area, it was actually looking at maps like this, maybe over the last 5 or 6 years, that have really, brought about quite a change in the way that we work as an organisation, and looking actually at how similar this map of inequality is to the map of inequalities of today, and seeing the structural patterns that are there that remain and that remain entrenched, really has been a real challenge to us. And saying actually we've done some lovely things over 135 years of odd history in Woolworth, but we haven't changed the map. And it's become more and more a vision for us is to say, well, what would it look like to see a long-term change in our neighbourhood, to redraw these sort of structural patterns of inequality in our neighbourhood? And that's become more and more the focus. So we focused our impact on a neighbourhood level and at long-term structural inequalities. And what's interesting about a vision like that over sort of 5 or 6 years is very quickly you realise that you can't do that on your own. You have to do that in partnership. Like, there's no way, no matter how wonderful our programs might be, there's no way that we're going to make a real dent on that inequality on our own. We have to build partnerships and collaborations with people across the neighbourhood and beyond who can work together with us and with local residents to try and create a neighbourhood that can see that type of long-term change. So partnership before COVID has been like inevitable. It has to be something with a vision that big. It has to be something that we have to do, and recognizing how few levers we have on our own. I think the other thing is we know that type of partnership working is often very sort of nebulous and steering group tables, and it's often quite aspirational. So the other thing before COVID is we've been trying to explore ways to make that practical, to say, okay, well, how can we flex those partnership muscles by working together on shared projects? So one of those was the Woolworth Living Room, an attempt to try and sort of build a new type of social infrastructure, a new space, a venue in Woolworth. And again, rather than us deliver that on our own, we took a dodgy old building that needed a lot of work, and we, with partners, said, well, let's build it together and try and understand what a living room is. So both a big vision, the inevitability of partnerships, and then trying to be practical were sort of 3 lessons before COVID about how do we turn something like this into something that actually is being used by the local community, and then how does that speak to some of the work that we're trying to do longer term. But, you know, with March last year, obviously all of that came sort of crashing to a halt, and we, like everybody else, were faced with this challenge of, okay, what do we do? What's our response now that our buildings are being shut, that our work is being shut, and how do we respond to the pandemic? So, I mean, our first call actually was to go back to the partnership, to go to the organisations that we work with in Woolworth, and we have a group in Woolworth called the Woolworth Group, which is an emerging sort of alliance of schools, of the council, of community organisations like Pembroke House, of tenants and residents associations, and a sort of really wide-ranging group. And we had our first ever Zoom call with the Woolworth Group and said, like, what are we going to do? What are you guys all seeing? What's your worry? What's coming back for your communities, for the people that you work with most closely? And the dominant sort of concern that everybody was reporting and saying is the thing that they're facing, or their communities are facing, was that concern about sort of access to food and essential goods at that early stages, when, you know, this is at the time with the sort of supermarket shelves being wiped clean. So together with that Woolworth Group and those partners, we set up a sort of response. We said, well, we need to have a coordinated response to that. Let's set up the Woolworth Community Food Hub. So let's think about how we can respond to that and that initial need, and then build from there to look at sort of wider needs that might be emerging. So the Woolworth Community Food Hub sort of has 3 key elements. So firstly, food and a venue. So back on in terms of using space in different ways, we flipped one of our buildings, now 2 of our buildings, into food hubs. Interesting, this is not the first time these type of spaces have been used differently over the course of a long history. You know, they've been used as bomb shelters, they've been used as restaurants, British restaurants during the war. This was like the latest incarnation of sort of use of flexible assets. So we flipped our building into a food sort of hub. That already was a partnership. So that was businesses coming forward, offering food. That was local restaurants coming forward, offering fridges and freezers. That was the council stepping forward to ask what support they could give to refit the space. And also then obviously huge amount of support from people like Fair Share and Felix Project. So food was the first element. Second thing though, you know, we had food, we then need to know who needs it. How do we get it to people who need it most urgently? And how do we build a sort of a local intelligence base? So with that Woolworth Group and a wider partnership in our neighbourhood, we built a network of about 40 to 50 referral partners, from schools to TRAs to organisations like ourselves, who all knew people intimately. They had intimate knowledge of their communities, and they could do the they could do the triage, they could do the understanding who needs help most urgently, and they would send through lists of people. Like, here's our list of people in Woolworth that we think need help most urgently with food and essential goods. And then, you know, so we had food, we had lists of people who needed support, but then the third thing is, how are we going to get this stuff to people's doorsteps? And we know people can't come to our centre because of social distancing. So we then, you know, but we were also seeing this amazing sort of groundswell of local energy and people wanting to step forward to help and step forward and help in their neighbourhoods, signing up to lists to volunteer, but maybe not always having a practical outcome or something to do as a result of that. So we said, all right, let's put a call out for people to help pack in our food hub, and then mainly people with bikes who would be willing to maybe use some slightly borrowed Deliveroo bags to pick up the food and then go and drop it at the doorstep of local neighbours. So we put a call out for volunteers, thinking we might get a few, but within 24 hours, I think we had 250 sign-ups, and we had to close the list because we needed to work through the ones we had. And that's continued. And I think that sort of appetite for people to step forward and help in their neighbourhood has been a phenomenal aspect of COVID, very clearly, and providing sort of clear routes for people through a bike shift where they can pick up food and deliver it to a neighbour, or a packing shift in a food hub, has provided a route for people to engage in their neighbourhood in a way that actually has been new for many of them. So we've had a sort of a cohort of over 600 volunteers over the period who have signed up. About 450 of them have been active at different times. And so together with those sort of partners at a neighbourhood level, the Woolworth Community Food Hub has been a pretty phenomenal effort, and it is really all the effort of those volunteers and those partners and the team who have organised it. But towards the bottom of this slide, you can see there's about 300 tons of food has been sort of shuffled around the backpacks of these volunteers. They've done about over 100,000 kilometres of cycling, and that's all in about 1.5 kilometre trips. So we are very neighbourhood based, and we stick within that sort of Woolworth frame. So that's been a sort of a neighbourhood response, but obviously Woolworth is only one part of Southwark, our broader borough. And actually this type of sort of neighbourhood partnership, this coordination happening in Woolworth, actually could only work as well as it has because we've also done a huge amount of work with our borough partners and trying to coordinate what has been a borough-wide response to the pandemic. And this has been a huge amount of effort and time and energy, and we can talk about what hasn't worked very much in this one, but we've done a lot of work from the very beginning of the pandemic with Southwark and with our partners in the NHS and health and social care to try and agitate or argue for a slightly more coordinated borough response as well as this neighbourhood response. So we've been arguing for these sort of clarified messages, I want to help, I need help, I want information. Some of this was taken, some wasn't always, but we then worked with them very closely on when the sort of setting up of these sort of borough-wide community hubs happened. How can we develop sort of triage systems with a single front door, a single access point at the borough level? And how do we work together as VCS, as community partners, as health partners, as Southwark, to make sure that we are funneling that information, we're triaging in the appropriate ways, and then we're getting people the support that they need most quickly. And we lent a lot here on sort of disaster relief expertise from partners. And we built with Southwark, we built for them with some of our tech partners, a whole new sort of referral platform for managing those inward referrals, all just using off-the-shelf technology. So the idea was like, how quickly can we move in this period to try and get the coordination that's required? And this platform is actually still being used today. So as well as the sort of neighbourhood response in Woolworth, through this sort of Southwark work, we were also, part of a wider network of about 8 to 9 food hubs, and then many, many more smaller food operations that operated across Southwark. So there's a huge amount of effort and energy that went into that partnership work in this period. So, but I guess the key question is like, what did we learn and what are we going to take with us? Like, what do we want to keep in our backpacks over the next couple of years? And then what's the stuff that really we just want to sort of leave at the doorstep? And I'll just say 4 things really quickly, and then we can dig into these in the Q&A maybe. But I mean, firstly, we talked a lot about this, in terms of reflection at the early stage of the pandemic. But for me, I was saying at those times, like, we achieved more in that first 6 months across partnerships and across sectors than we had done in the 6 years before it. There was a phenomenal sort of collaborative effort. And I think there were some key elements to that I think we need to think through, and we need to think about how we can make sure that these are sustainable. But one key thing back to that sort of neighbourhood vision I was talking about at the beginning is, in the pandemic, very clearly, we had an aim or a vision to get help to people who are most vulnerable because of lockdown that none of us could achieve on our own. And that was such a huge aim that partnership working wasn't a choice. It wasn't a sort of a nice to have or an add-on. It was essential. And that sort of urgency of that vision and that mobilization that led to in terms of partnership working, I think is something we need to think about. How do we create those visions, those bigger visions in the longer term that make sure partnership working is essential, not just an add-on? And I think the other thing, as part of that, as we didn't just have a vision, we also had really clear activities to work on. So back, thinking about for us before the pandemic, something like the Woolworth Living Room was a practical thing. In the pandemic, we had really clear things like we need to share intelligence, we need to build out new distribution services, we need to flip our activities online. That clarity of activity matched with that sort of big vision meant that partnership working could form in ways that it hasn't done previously, I think. Secondly, and more briefly, I think the neighbourhood perspective is the other thing that we've really sort of learned the power of. We've all had to get access to goods within 15 minutes or in our local communities. I think for everyone in the pandemic, that sort of re-engaging with your local community has been an element of this. But I think in terms of thinking about that in the longer term, what's the legacy we want to build of that sort of recommitment back to neighbourhoods? You know, in terms of funding, how can we start to focus on creating the conditions for change, the sort of infrastructure, the longer term partnership building? How do we create those type of environments over the longer term such that, you know, we can move quickly when we face challenges? And a lot of what I've talked about in Woolworth has been, we were able to go so quickly in Woolworth in the pandemic because actually the huge amount of long-term difficult work that we've done beforehand as partners and the investment in infrastructure, in people, in roles that has made that sort of possible. And I think this is another key lesson for us, is actually, we call this the neighbourhood funnel. But the work that's happened in Woolworth has only been possible because of the link it had to the work that was happening at the borough, and actually also the work that was happening through borough food groups with the GLA and the regional tiers and other tiers. There's often a lot of heroic work that happens at these individual tiers. There's not often always a brilliant linkages between them. And I think in terms of one of the lessons of the pandemic was where things worked most effectively, there were alliances formed that went up and down this funnel. And there were people working in the borough who had key relationships with people working in neighbourhoods, who had key relationships with very localised intelligence. And it was a sharing of that information that made possible some of the responses that we had. So again, how can we invest looking forward? How can we invest in making those type of coalitions a sort of a conscious effort and aim of our work, both as funders, but also as organisations like ours and partners. And then finally, and I think this is the biggest challenge, really is building this sort of longer term legacy. And I've told you a story about a food hub, and I've told you a story about a food bank response that is amazing in terms of the partnerships that's been formed. But also, let's be honest, you know, it's a scandal that people need food hubs. And we've been saying all the way through this that this has been the right thing to do in a crisis, but it's utterly the wrong thing to do in the long term. And our challenge now is one of transition, is actually how do we undermine the food hub model and start building towards a much longer term, more sustainable model that takes the energy and the sort of ethos and the aspirations that sort of come to the fore in the pandemic into a sort of a longer term change in our neighbourhood. So we in the summer brought together sort of our volunteers, some of our food bank recipients, our partners, and said, look, we need to talk. We need to have a public discussion about how can it be right that a place like Woolworth, where we have multi-million-pound apartments, has got so many people facing food insecurity, and actually insecurity that was there before the pandemic that has been revealed and exacerbated, but not caused by the pandemic. So how do we channel some of this energy in the food bank towards that sort of longer term model? And through some of the ideas that are coming forward in this discussion and through the work that we've done with partners, we're now working on a sort of a neighborhood food model that can sort of start to see food as a reason to bring people together and a reason to sort of catalyze action, not as a breadline issue. And how do we use something like this to sort of build longer term sort of community wealth building principles into the approach that ensures that we can start to sort of challenge some of the root causes of the issue and not just the symptoms that we've been dealing with in the crisis. And I think, you know, the challenge here will be, you know, how do we again do that work in a local area, but knowing that we have to link that to work through this funnel up, you know, to the borough, the regions, and then more hyper locally. So those are sort of some of the things that we're going to be taking with us, and maybe in the Q&A, I'll stop talking, but in the Q&A, maybe we could pick up some of the sort of implications potentially for funding, you know, a bit more detail.
Thank you, Mike. That was such a rich presentation. Very intrigued actually by the last few slides that you've shared around, you know, going deeper than the symptoms and looking at the mental models. I would probably look at that and how do you sort of reimagine this. That's very powerful. Thanks. I'm sure that many people from our audience also have curiosity and I want to ask some questions. So thanks, Mike. And I think now it's the right time for Sam to come in for his presentation. He's the head of programs at the London Sports Trust. Over to you, Sam, for your bit, and then we're going to move into a Q&A with all of you. So attendees, participants, audience, please stay where you are. We'll surely be answering questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anis. So we're from the London Sports Trust, so based in sort of RBKC, Westminster, and Hammersmith and Fulham. Over the last year, it's obviously been pretty difficult in terms of what we've done. It all went from being face-to-face to going online, which a lot of our coaches found quite difficult, and a lot of our staff did as well, because obviously working within the community, we found we didn't find it was quite a hard sort of transition to go through. So we sort of came together as a team, like the rest of you guys, and sort of thought about how we could connect with our local community. So we sort of used those we work with a lot of the young people, and we sort of started tapping into what they sort of followed as well. So we sort of looked into sort of Instagrams and stuff like that, and started using that as a platform to sort of move some of our sessions through, and doing cooking sessions and doing some sports sessions as well, especially on like Zoom and Teams, which worked quite well actually, and which we were quite surprised with at the start. But what we did find in that sort of period of time over the year is lots of people had that digital poverty, sort of not being able to access, which we found what we couldn't have much control over. So we started to sort of deliver like bits of equipment and stuff like that to lots of different people, and so they could start using those green spaces and start using those areas, which some of them are outside their blocks, and they could just use balls and tennis balls and balloon games and challenges that we sort of looked to do a little bit more that they could do. So that's what sort of we looked to do over the last year. Then once lockdowns eased a little bit, we were offered an amazing site in RBKC, just by the canal, and there with the kayaking, and there was sort of like a car park. And what we sort of found, we sort of got there, and it was a very empty space. And as sports people, you become quite creative, and you look to do lots of different things in different areas. But what we found is when kids came, they didn't really know what to do with the space. So as a group, we sort of sat there and sort of discussed what we could do, and sort of going to loads of playgrounds and lots of different areas in the local borough, and started to think of what we could do. So we worked with some of the kids who come there and some of the local community as well, and we started making sort of a picture of what we wanted to do. So what we did is we made lots of different courts and started using some of the spaces around the site as sort of growing areas as well. So sort of like mini allotments at the same time. So using the space as much as possible and make it as effective as possible as well. So I have got a picture here, so I will try and do my best to show you all. So this is sort of what the site looked like. So obviously not very inspiring. It was, we've got some tennis nets here and stuff like that. So, and then it was all it didn't really light up the place really. And it didn't really, for what it is as a community hub, it didn't really do justice and what we were doing as we wanted to do as a community. So what we tried to do is try and really liven it up a little bit more. So over the sort of last year, it sort of became a little project which sort of developed nice and naturally. So when working and getting people on the canal and stuff, we had lots of people sort of coming to the fence and asking what's going on and how we can develop things, and looking at the plant pots and what they can do. So we had lots of volunteers who popped in and sort of said, "Oh, can we help do stuff around the site?" And we at first we were sort of a bit taken aback by it, and we didn't really know what to do. But then we sort of embraced it, and we had gardening groups, we had local gardeners come along, and they said what to do with the pots for like seasonal stuff. And then what they started to do is plant lots of different potatoes and spinach and stuff like that around the site. And then it sort of started just making it into like a really nice sort of like community area where people could sort of grow things, and they'd come in and then pick their own vegetables throughout the pandemic. And I think it was sort of a release which really helped a lot of people sort of get through that period of time. So that's what we sort of worked really closely on. And then we started working with some of the young people and then started developing what we were going to do at the site. So we went from very dreary and sort of not very nice to a very colourful pitch at the end. So we drew with some of our volunteers that line markers came, and we bought paint and stuff, and we started painting some of the areas. So it started to become very colourful. Kids chose what paints they wanted to do on the floor and stuff like that, and then allowed them to just sort of, we marked out the area and they just started painting. So it sort of worked out really well for us in terms of how we did it. So and then we sort of came to our back of our where all our boats are, this nice shutter, which was sort of didn't really identify with what we do. So we decided to change that. So we decided to make it a little bit different and bring it really to life so people can see what we're doing. So we worked with local graffiti artists and designed with the kids the shutters to sort of really bring it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we cannot see the pictures.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I think it might be easier if you, I don't know, maybe share the other window that it's opening, because I've noticed that the way it is not showing.
Sorry, this is right. Does that work? Is that good?
Perfect. Yeah.
So yeah, so this is one of the pictures, obviously with a nice colourful background, and then so that was that's how it started off, and then we moved on to the shutters, which the kids were really adamant to sort of get involved in, and some of the older kids wanted to start doing some like spray painting and sort of start to learn how to do it. So I'm going to see if I can get this picture up of our spray painting stuff. Sorry. Can you see that? No.
No, you need to share the other app that you have open.
Okay. No, that's not working either, is it?
Yeah, we can see a photo here. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it colourful?
It is very colourful. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent.
Bright blue sky.
So this is what the kids designed in the half term, which was a real great sort of piece. Obviously, they didn't design it all, but we had local graffiti artists who also helped us design that. So it was a great sort of piece that we sort of brought together, and it was sort of a bit of a celebration by the end, because the kids, now they come to the site and they get to see what they've done. And I guess for us, it's sort of them owning the site, and then them sort of like putting their impact into it, as well as the local community who've done, the stuff around the site as well, doing the gardening. So it's all sort of come together. So we've just essentially put loads of sort of colour and sort of impact into what we've done. So it's sort of brought it all to life and sort of become a really nice sort of area for people to come in. And from there, it's given us a lot more room for people to actually come and look and a bit more curious, to be honest, and come in and to ask what's going on and get involved in other programs within that community. So that's what we've really done to our site. It's sort of transformed it in that sense, that it turned from a car park, which wasn't very creative, to more of a play site for all sort of ages that they can use, from tennis to badminton to basketball to football. So it's trying to use, I guess it was trying to use that site effectively, as well as using it effectively in that period of time, and changing and having that time to change it with the kids as well, and the adults. I guess from this, what we sort of learned was, obviously, using our time, using that site and using how important that site was to the local community, because so many people have seen it, but they didn't really know what it was. And I guess it gave people an opportunity to do something with their spare time as well. So we used it as free time. And we had those conversations with a lot of people about mental health and how they're getting through that pandemic. And it was sort of, I guess it was sort of a sounding board for a lot of people when doing it. And it was a really good way to sort of meet people within an outdoor setting to sort of socialize at the same time, and sort of, you know, a lot of them have stayed on to volunteer and help at a number of our projects. So there has been that long-lasting effect as well through after the pandemic as well, through it as well, and sort of helping out some of the sessions that we're doing currently as well. So that's really helped in terms of going forward. And then I guess long-term going forward, what we found with, you know, doing this project was that lots of people, there's obviously a Sainsbury's right next to us, but lots of people we found didn't really eat. So we started putting on like food services. So sort of we contacted the local City Harvest and sort of worked alongside them and just started putting food out. And then people started collecting food, and then we started just making food parcels. And that's something that we're trying to incorporate into all of our projects and trying to get people, you know, not being embarrassed, like just taking whatever they want when there's a session there. And it's sort of worked quite well, because it's sort of helped for, sort of takes that stigma away. Because obviously kids are hungry, but it's giving them the right healthy options as well, and sort of doing lots of fun activities with them on the site. So that's sort of something that what we're going to probably do through long term, is sort of look at that sort of food adding to sessions and sort of giving the kids the options of having, you know, fruit and vegetables and what they can do with it as well. So that's one of the main things that we're going to start doing going forward. So yeah, and then I guess in terms of like funders and going forward, and what we've learned with funding is sort of working in partnership, like a lot of the other guys have said, is sort of working in partnerships and making bigger projects out of something that's a lot smaller, and sort of making it more of a community and bringing intergenerational stuff as well together. So that's what I guess going forward, funders maybe looking differently, bringing more partnerships together and making it a bigger project. So yeah, so that's me done.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to all of the panelists for the impact they're delivering out there. And it's been great to see also the work that has been delivered also in pictures just now, Sam. It makes a difference to look at that. And I will now open the conversation to some questions. We have a number of questions from people that have gone through our session today, and I will start us off with a question by Sarah Thurman from United St. Saviour's Charity Southwark. And Sarah, I would like to ask all of you really, but maybe one of you could start us off, and then we'll see, you know, if anyone else has anything to add, please chip in. So the question is, what is the most fundamental thing that you've learned from the 2020 crisis? And how do you think this will shape your work moving forward? So one thing. Yes, Patrick.
I actually, well, I've already thought this, but I think listening to the panelists today really reinforces it, and that is that none of us in isolation are the answer, really. I was listening to the others and I was thinking, wow, it'd be great to work with this lot, you know, all of them, you know, if we were all doing stuff together. And it's that kind of thinking, you know, none of us are the answer alone, but we all do quite different things, but we all provide these kind of little parts to kind of a bigger solution, really. And I think that's something we're very keen in taking forward, you know, collaborations, partnerships, working with others, you know, kind of getting outside the comfort zone as well, kind of stuff.
Thanks, Patrick. that's certainly a theme as well in the work that we've been doing with the London Funders, collaboration being central and key. Anyone from the other panelists would like to come in here as well on the one thing that you've learned from this? Otis? Yeah, sorry, you're mute.
Sorry, I should be used to this by now. Sorry. Yeah, just as the previous panelist said, I mean, we learned that the world's become smaller. There's a lot more work being done because we had time to speak to each other. We had time to find out a lot more about what people do. What we learned is that there's a lot of training out there. There's a lot of information out there that you know, ourselves and the community can get hold of and learn. It's never too late to learn. But the biggest thing we take from 2020 and the crisis was flexibility and to be adaptable. And that is really even the way we report to funders. You know, we had to be creative in terms of, you know, what we did with pictures and videos and just different ways how we can get the message across of the work that we're doing. And also, just to echo previous panelists said, was about working together with other organizations. I think in this period, loads of people were on different calls, different Zooms, different, and you learn a lot more about what people do than you would if we were meeting face to face before the pandemic started. So I think that's been fantastic to actually pick out who your charity aligns with, people to learn a little bit more about you. So that was a big learning curve for us, and a welcome learning curve.
Yes, Mike.
I'd really echo that. Both what Otis and Patrick have said there, and I think that there's something about the sort of the collaborative teams that were formed, especially in those early stages of the pandemic, and just thinking about partnerships with funders and also the council. I mean, there were times, Sarah, and I'm sure you won't mind me shining a light on you, but we worked with Sarah from United St Saviour's, for example, alongside our council colleagues, really agitating for working together on the call for a much clearer sort of communications that were coming out from the borough, and there was a sense of actually all of us working alongside that as partners, not as a typical sort of funder-fundee relationship or a council VCS supplicant relationship. There was a sense of actually us all around the table as a working group, bringing particular perspectives and things to the table, but all having something to share or something to bring to that sort of collective fight. And I think, how we create those type of sort of working groups in the future is going to be one of the big challenges. Like, how do we create that working group when we don't have the burning platform of a pandemic? And can we create that sort of same sense of urgency in those dynamics? Because there was a real blasting through there of some of the power dynamics that are often get in the way of us working effectively together. So,
thanks, Mike. Sam.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those. To be honest, I think it was that partnership work that really emphasised everything that we were doing. I think we're a sports charity, so when it comes to things, we're very sports led. So we don't we think quite that's how we're going to go along, trying to get lots of sporty people involved or people who are on the fringe of it. So it was great learning about other charities and seeing what they actually do and see what they can bring to the table. I think that's what I sort of learned big time, sort of the gardening people bringing something to a sports sort of centre and saying, look, you can do this and this can help out what we do as well. So I guess embracing that community, and we learned how strong the actual community was, and bringing that pandemic brought everybody together, and it wasn't anything to do with it. It was just sort of everybody just trying to help everybody out, which was really nice to see. And I guess it was just the kindness of people, which was amazing throughout.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to go to the next question here, which is by Sarah Ridley. She's a philanthropy advisor and very impressed by the ability of the panelists to work differently and quickly. And her question is about, to what extent and in what ways have funders helped or hindered your new ways of working? And what messages do you have for funders about funding in the future?
Hi. Yeah, really good question. I think, you know, a lot of organizations, we're a small to medium-sized charity. I think a lot of organizations, when the pandemic hit, kind of had to have a little bit of a stock take and have a look around. And, you know, I think, you know, if you listen to the news, you know, that was one of the sectors. Are they going to survive? What's going to happen to the charitable sector? You know, a bit of uncertainty. I think the funders across the board, I mean, you could, you know, we were constantly sent funding bulletins. I think the response collectively was brilliant, because I think what it gave is it gave people who perhaps were, you know, going after the bigger funding pots or the obvious ones. It gave people a chance to feel that they could get something started, and the menu of activities where people were willing to fund was quite broad. So I think, you know, it kind of, I mean, I can say just definitely for us, when we were kind of searching to what might be suited for us to look at deliver in our discussions, we looked and we thought, right, this is quite broad. I think we can perhaps get started there, but perhaps we can look at some of the response funds that were brilliant. So I'd like to commend the funders for reacting quickly and for clubbing in together to meet the needs of the community. And I think, you know, some people got more than others. Some people were more active than others in applying for funds, but I felt that the response time to turn money around was quick. I think funders were listening to the type of timeframes which you could turn reports around. And I think this space has created a better understanding between funder and delivery partner, and long may it continue. Thanks.
Thanks, Odis. Anyone who would like to respond further to this question?
I'll just throw a couple of bits in, Yanis. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I thought the relationship between funders and you know, funded, at least from our perspective, was fantastic. You know, the way the funders turned around and kind of simplified the application process in particular was excellent. The speed of actually processing applications, the simplification, you know, I mean, it was exactly what was needed. And, you know, I'm not saying those things can continue forever, but I think that kind of responsive, streamlined approach was really, really useful for us. And even going forward, any kind of simplification in application procedures is great. Reporting, you know, kind of making that as easy as possible to do. Bearing in mind, I mean, I spent the last 5 days just writing reports, you know, which is fine and it's great and it's about sharing that learning. But as I can see Mike smiling as well, he might have been at it this weekend, same as me. But you know, when you're writing all this stuff, you just think, flipping it, can't I just send one report to all of them and just let them see can't we just all have a conversation and just work this through, you know? You know, obviously it's incumbent on us to do this, but you know, all I'm really saying is any kind of simplification, I think is great. And one final point, I mean, I don't know how much this is a particular issue for my type of organization or if the others share it, but is funding for core costs. You know, over the years in particular, everything now is about project funding, you know, and there is this massive pressure on us and me as a leader of an organization to try and come up with projects that can deliver specific services and things like that, and to try and keep the organization surviving off just what we can kind of skim off the top in core costs from individual project bids. And the real risk to my organization with things like this is that it doesn't help us plan in the long term, you know. So long-term funding is great anyway, but but just working on the basis of multiple projects really doesn't help us develop and be as agile sometimes as we'd like to be. So any kind of acknowledgement of funding for core costs, I think, is genius. I mean, I'm not sure if they're actually here today, but I know the Community Justice Fund, actually some of the money they contributed for the organisations like us, how they approached that was really good, but that was, again, specifically at core costs and recognising that. And it'd be great to kind of see that more broadly, or, some kind of acknowledgement in that. I'm running out of new project ideas, I guess.
Thanks, Patrick. Anyone else? Mike?
Yeah, I think, really echo that. I mean, I think the flexibility was fantastic at the beginning. I think and I think that really helped. So I won't repeat the comments that have been said, but just agree with both Patrick and Otis on that. I think in terms of thinking longer term now, and where we go, or sort of message for the future, for me, there's something about, and I think it picks up on Patrick, your point there about core costs, about what it means to fund the conditions for change. That's rather than fund the project that you think is going to lead to the change, it's actually how do we fund the conditions of the infrastructure, the people, the places, the time that is needed in particular places. So and that picks up on core costs, but that's also thinking about assets, that's also thinking about the buildings, the places that we inhabit. And for me, I think one of the key lessons, we talked a lot about Woolworth in my presentation, that really is possible, has been possible because of the investment of United St Saviour's, of Guys and St Thomas's Charity, of Southwark Council over time in a place like Woolworth, into people and into places. And so I think that's really thinking about how we can fund the conditions for change rather than a project that we think might lead it, but often maybe doesn't. So that's one. I think the other thing I think about in terms of that reporting point, I think is really crucial. I think back to the collaborative team's wacky idea, but wouldn't it be interesting if we were all reporting on, and funders included, on our contribution to the change we're trying to see? So what if we're all actually having to write reports about, did we change inequality in Woolworth? What was our role? Did we change inequality in Brixton? What was our contribution to that? That again would equalize that would change and disrupt that dynamic, which I think would be really interesting. And then I think Sarah's, in one of the other questions that came up, I think I spotted there in terms of the transition, how do we fund, and how do we think about, there's been a lot that's spent on emergency funding, but how do we now think about the longer term aims and funding the sort of bold ambitions to build the legacy? I think that's really a key question, and we've got to dig into it. And I think this was said to me by another partner organisation, was there's a danger now that food hubs and food is becoming profitable for charities. And that's because the funds are there for the emergency response. And I think there's a real question therefore about how do we shift the dial away, and when do we get to the point of saying no, there's no more emergency funds. We're now looking for longer term legacy funding that's based around the longer term outcomes that we want to get to. So that was a real, when I heard that from a partner, I thought that's a really key challenge that I think we need to think through.
Thanks, Mike. We have a few more questions to go through. There's clearly an increase in demand due to the fall of the pandemic. Brian Foxley is saying from Centre 70. How do you propose to deal with that? And is there the internal capacity, or will you need to expand and identify funds for that? I think that links a little bit to some of the things that you've shared, but does any one of you want to take this one? It's not specifically for anyone.
Could you just repeat that again, Yanis? I missed the first part of that, I'm afraid, sorry.
Sorry, it talks to the fact that there has been an increase in demand due to the fallout of the pandemic. And how do you propose to deal with that? And if there's an internal capacity to help you deal with that, or you will need to expand and get funding for that. If that's true for you, I suppose. I think it is.
I don't mind picking, just starting with the first bit on that. I think and again, it links back to the lessons learned from this. You know, where we're going with this is that we need to, how I feel, well, let me describe how I feel about my organization. I feel that the demand is skyrocketing, and I feel that we haven't got enough staff, volunteers, resources, time to meet that. And I'm really worried about that, and what we can do about that. And that's just us serving our responsibility in terms of advice need in the Borough of Lambeth and things. So a key thing again to us is how do we develop our organization? And I think it's great, you see with, I think, is it City Bridge who are doing the thing about, you know, kind of working with not just funding, but working in developing the organizations and things like that. I think that's all great. But I also think it is funding as well, you know, for how do we build organizations? I really think we need to not just be investing now in, or funders shouldn't be investing now in services. They need to be really thinking about how do we protect the third sector organizations that have pretty much shown that on a string and a prayer have kind of held together a ridiculously momentous effort over the last 14 months in helping so many people in the community. And how do we just make sure those organizations stay and survive? I mean, in Lambeth, we've lost, there are only 2 advice providers left now, ourselves and Centre 70. We know we lost Lambeth Law Centre about 18 months ago. We lost Advising Communities. You know what? You know, when we go, what's left? You know, what happens to these people? I really think we need to just look after, do what we can to try and just make sure organizations can survive and are just able to do what they're able to do. I'm sorry if that wasn't very focused on Brian's question there, by the way. Apologies, Brian.
Thanks, Patrick. I'd like to ask now some specific questions that are addressed to some of you. First of all, I'll start with a question that is for funders. And I will look at Geraldine here. So the question is about volunteers, and it's from Jerry Evans, and he's noting that there's a surge in interest in the last year along with a planned outlay of time and learning regarding volunteer management, development, retention, and so on. So are funders considering standardizing or guiding a view of volunteer costs and advice in budgeting and fund applications?
It's a really good question, actually. Funders are very interested. There is no standardized approach at the moment, but funders are very interested and have been for some time pre-pandemic, but much more so in the last year, about how are the organisations they're funding supporting their volunteers and their staff, you know. And Patrick, you pointed out that actually, you know, the amount of time that you put into supporting a workforce when you're not all in the office together is really really big. We asked a question in we said from about wave 2, we said, you know, please ask for the costs of supporting your staff and volunteers. And actually it was really interesting how few organisations asked for additional costs for that. We then in wave 5, we put a question in which said, how are you supporting the costs, your staff and volunteers? You know, tell us what you're doing, and then connect this to a request in the budget field. So there's a lot of data there about what organisations are doing, what the struggles are. There's a session actually in the Festival of Learning on Monday afternoon about resilience, which is you know, some funder reflections on what some funders are already doing, what other funders are thinking about doing. But it's been a big interest for London funders over a couple of years now. So it's something that we will definitely pick up. We can see that it's you know, it's gone right up the agenda, hasn't it, for everyone, not just the volunteers, but also staff members.
Thanks. Geraldine.
Can I? Sorry, Yanis. Sorry for talking over you then. So I just wanted to jump in and make just a quick point on what Geraldine said then about not many people applying for it. I can kind of understand that. I think we're you know, speaking for myself, we're also conditioned by the type of bids we can submit, the type of whatever, you know, and I think the fault may squarely lay with us, you know, in that we just couldn't believe that you would actually be so reasonable and entertain such flexibility, perhaps, you know, that's it. But I think we're very used to playing down our costs, you know, because we're used to being turned down, we're used to, you know, having certain things queried and things. So perhaps it's just a bit of a crossover from the before period, you know, before the pandemic.
I think there's definitely a bit of education, isn't there, on both sides, that it's, you know, funders will pay for it, it's okay to ask for it. If you ask for it, then funders will actually fund it and not strip it out again. I know there's a couple of funders previously to the pandemic who would go back to applicants and say, can we give you some additional money on top of the grant, which is specifically for supporting your staff and volunteers. So that kind of practice, I think, you know, we really need to make sure that that's widespread and that's fully understood by the sector.
Thanks, Geraldine. A couple of last questions. One is for Mike, specifically by Mimi Fung. And her question is about whether you have any plans to continue working with a large number of volunteers going forward.
Yeah, I'm smiling at this because it's one of the things that the team, we're most, you know, it's the thing that we're most thinking through at the moment, is because we don't think we're going to have this long-term food bank. Well, we know we're not going to have this food bank and this model, and the engagement has been driven by having the clarity of these roles of food hub volunteer and food hub rider. And that's provided a really great entry route for people. But then when we speak to volunteers, and this is what we're doing now, we're doing a huge amount of like resource into engaging with volunteers to understand like what's their journey been in this, like what have you learned, what surprised you, what shocked you. It's about the route that the role has been an excuse to meet each other, and has been an excuse to be involved in something in their neighborhood, to have a new perspective on the place where they've lived and traveled through and commute through, but maybe don't feel a part of, and a sense of like contributing to something a bit bigger. So the question is like, how do we turn that into longer term engagement in a neighborhood, and that be, again, our metric of success, not be our number of volunteers that we put in our annual report at the end of the year, but our metric of success is more like, how has the work that we've done helped people engage better in their neighborhood? So that's how we wrap a program around that, and evaluation and, you know, design that type of engagement is really difficult. So we do, we do definitely want to continue to work with all of those volunteers and to find ways of like, you know, keeping in touch and things. I don't think it's going to look like us having 600 bike volunteers and 600 food hub volunteers. And the aim has got to be engagement with the neighborhood. So those are the design principles, I guess, we're working on.
Thanks, Mike. I think that links well with what you were talking about, changing the paradigm almost. Last question is for Patrick. Patrick, were there any noticeable differences in the profile of people who use your services before and during the pandemic? And did you need to put in any measure to reach people who find it difficult to use online services, such as people with a language barrier, lack of access to IT, etc.?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, is that. We did notice a bit of a change. I mean, our kind of standard demographics at the centre in terms of our clients are probably about 75% of our clients are BAME backgrounds. During the pandemic, that dropped to around 40%, I believe it was. And I think what that was reflecting really was that we were kind of being, because we'd kind of moved to an online model, or where we were kind of encouraging people to contact us over the telephone or use the web forms. I think actually wider areas of Lambeth were actually using us who may not have used us previously, and actually areas outside Lambeth. I mean, one of the things, funny enough, we're going to do some work on is like retrospective work, understanding this is kind of mapping where users were coming from and looking at that as kind of a discrete piece of work. I think there's lots of interesting stuff in there. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question, Yanis? If you don't mind.
If you put any measures in place to reach people who find it difficult to use online.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. I mean, we did a number of things that we thought could help with that. We didn't think we would be able to solve it on our own. We formed some kind of partnerships with kind of local groups that were able to distribute, you know, free laptops, tablets, smartphones, and things like that. You know, and kind of identify kind of ways of getting them out to people. We had a big sign on our door with the number and what have you. So hopefully people could telephone. We had lots of information on the website. We provided lots of information to kind of third parties as well. But the other thing I think that was for us as well is even though we were locked down, we did actually have half the staff working on site as well. So even in the lockdown, it wasn't uncommon for people to come and just literally knock on the door and say, look, this is happening, can you help me? And you know, and in a doorstep conversation, you know, sometimes, you know, we'd sort that out. But it's definitely a need, and it's definitely something we were worried about, because a lot of our very local community, particularly the elderly, are very reliant literally on just walking in the door. This is one of the reasons we opened as soon as we could last year, just to try and be able to do that. But it's not an ideal situation, just relying entirely on the digital stuff. We really need to look at how that can fit with everything else. We can't metamorphosize into this digital entity. We need to kind of balance everything.
Thanks, Patrick, and a big thank you to all four of you for the great presentations and the insights you've shared with all of us today. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to hand over to Geraldine in 2 minutes because she wants to do a little ending. But before I do that, I'm going to have a cheeky last question, and please keep it at 20 seconds. So otherwise we're not going to meet it. It's one of the audience who asked, it's Sarah. It was the second question, cheeky second question. We'll get that too as well. What are your asks of London funders? But just in 20 seconds, just one line, like not a long spiel. What are your asks? Let's go over to, who wants to start us off? I don't want to put you on the spot. 20 seconds. Patrick.
I feel obliged. I think keep working with us. Thank you for everything you did. Keep working with us. We couldn't have done any of this without you, and you're part of that as well. So keep working with us. Look at and be open to kind of us coming up with new and interesting ways of doing things, and being honest with you about the issues that we're having. Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick.
Hi. Yeah. Yeah. It's just for us. You know, it's been great to be able to see so many funders collectively, collaboratively trying to help different parts of the community. For us going forward, as we move out into this period, we have 12,000 people coming into our space, our centre. One of the things we're looking at is how we improve the centre, how we cover some of the spaces to make it all year round. You know, we've had a massive surge in volunteers and people that want to help naturally, and we've got a one-stop shop where people are coming from all over the borough to come into this space. We've got a large amount of people over 40 that almost want to be kids again. It's like an adult youth club. Yeah, just you know, keep us informed in what your visions are, and hopefully that, you know, some of it will match some of the stuff. And if you're able to come out and visit some of the projects sometimes, it makes it difficult, please do visit any of the projects that you know your capacity allows you to do. It makes a big difference when you kind of see it in the flesh, and and be able to respond accordingly. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Otis. Mike, I think you wanted to go as well.
Yeah, no, I think, ask would be around that. I'm going to do two cheeky ones. One is around the conditions of the change. So thinking about how we fund the conditions of the change. And as part of that, to continue a conversation about like what it would mean to shift, so to keep that sort of partnership working between us and funders. What makes that partnership work best? I'd love to dig into that question with London funders as a group, and to try and understand how best to keep that sort of collaborative team approach that was working in the pandemic.
Thanks, Mike. Sam.
Yeah, again, I think it's that partnership stuff and sort of not having that cold sort of application, sort of speaking with the funders straight away, and sort of, again, like I said, sort of inviting them down and sort of seeing what we see, and sort of, I guess, sort of giving that sort of presentation on, if they can, obviously, I know obviously with the pandemic, but using that as a sort of way of sort of doing our play of how are you going to spend money and what they can see, and they can vision it a little bit more, I think.
Thank you. Geraldine, over to you.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's been a really brilliant session. Thank you so much to Yanis and Sydney, and to all of the panelists. You've been really inspiring and really thought-provoking. And I think there are probably three things that we will take away from this. One of those is about the kind of long-term investment, core costs, you know, the investment in people and places over time. The last wave of the London Community Response did have a core cost funding programme, and almost £7 million went out in core costs. So it's definitely something that funders are hearing very loudly and working hard to respond to. The second thing is about that, you know, none of us have the answer. This is about collaborations, not just between funders, but, you know, up and down, between the regional and the local, between the you know, the community project and the funder and the council, and how we, I mean, it has been amazing, hasn't it, what we've been able to do over the last year, and how we keep that sense of urgency and make sure that we do that. And I think the third thing, actually, Mike, your question about, you know, why isn't there a single place where we all report into about what we are contributing to long-term change? That's a really exciting challenge. I think we will. I think we're going to take you up on that. I mean, we did in the last year. We've done a single application form, and that's been, you know, that's been like the holy grail, hasn't it? Why can't we have a single application form? Well, we've done that now. So let's move on to some kind of single reporting format. So yes, huge thanks to all of you. There are, just a reminder to everyone that there are more exciting sessions coming up today and over the next 5 days in the Festival of Learning, and look forward to seeing some of you, all of you, on sessions later on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's it. Thanks to our panelists, and there's another session starting in 5 minutes here. So see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.